Good evening. We are the boys from the Baltic Star, and we do narrative gaming. And usually there are between two and sometimes up to five of us. But tonight there's just me, and I've been left with the responsibility of finding something to talk about this evening. So I thought I would take the opportunity to talk about something that is quite important to me. Um, and it is the DIDO game, which is nothing to do with the ancient and almost certainly mythical Queen of Carthage. Um, it's simply a name that I came up with for something. And what it's a name for, or what it's an acronym for, I should say, is drop in, drop out. So we need to begin the story um, with the NHS. The British National Health Service is how most of us Brits get our general purpose healthcare. It's paid for through general taxation and through a number of programs that are collectively known as the sort of national insurance contributions. And then essentially the deal is that it is free at the point of delivery. So you don't have to pay for going to a doctor or getting a prescription or whatever for the most part. And when you do have to pay, it's very modestly priced. And anyone who can't afford that kind of thing essentially gets it discounted to the point of it not even being a significant amount of money at all. Okay, so that's the NHS. Now, about a year or so ago, my local NHS surgery put out a call for people to be something called health champions. Now, it's important to note that when you look at me, you might not think picture of health, ideal person to sort of talk about health to people, and thankfully that's not what they were aiming for. They were looking for people who were willing to help out in the community with anything that would support the physical or mental well-being of the surgery's thousands upon thousands of patients. And in my little town, almost all of the patients essentially attend one surgery with, I don't know, 20 doctors and countless other staff as well. It's that kind of scale of surgery. And they pulled us all together. Anyone who said, yes, I'm interested, came together into a meeting and we talked about what we might be both interested in doing and able to do. And I had assumed, I will confess, that because I have a background in IT, what I would mostly be doing was showing people how to use their mobile phones to access the various online resources that the surgery provides. And as it turned out, there was not, it wasn't like people said that's a bad idea or anything, but they were much more interested when I said I run tabletop role-playing games. So the idea was that I would run a community tabletop RPG. And they would arrange, because the surgery has access to all sorts of local connections, they would arrange to find us a place that we could have for free, which turned out to be in a local community sort of hall space. And lovely, it is, very nice. And in that case, they would put it on their social media feeds and say, we're running this game, just turn up. Which left me with a problem, because most RPGs rely on session zeros and big character creation and complicated storytelling and what have you. So I sat down and put together something I refer to as a DIDO game. This is drop in, drop out. So in essence, the principle was, could I build a successful tabletop RPG where week by week, completely different numbers of people, different actual people would turn up. You might have regulars who'd come back for weeks, but you might have somebody just turn up occasionally or just once, try it for themselves and then decide it wasn't for them, or only have availability one session, but still want to jump in and have a go. So, as a consequence, I sat down and worked out how you could do this. And I came up with a plan. So, it basically has 3 parts to it. The first is the way characters are created. Character creation has to be incredibly simple. Simple enough that you can give someone a little sheet of paper that says, this is how you roll up a character, and a little character sheet, and they can literally roll some dice and fill in the details on the character sheet step by step from that system. Which meant, in my case, taking the fighting fantasy rules, which have very, very simplistic character generation, and then modifying them to be suitable for whatever the scenario and campaign was, plus a few tweaks to provide a bit more excitement on the way various dice rolls would be and how they would be handled. So, that was the first part. The second part was to consider the structure of the game, because if you think about it, you have to have a game structure where it's possible for somebody to jump in episode 4 of the story and only play episode 4. And my solution was to come up with the idea that the heroes are part of a much larger group engaged on a mission of some kind, and at any given moment we're following a subset of that group as they set about trying to achieve their goal, which means it could be a completely different selection or some overlapping selections. It could be the case that when you have 2 new players join in, they could become just new hangers-on for this existing group, or if you haven't got any people who were there for last week, for example, you could actually have a situation where a completely new group coalesces out of the collective and goes off to achieve that objective. And I needed this to be the case rather than one-shot stories, because one-shot stories are not as interesting for people to play if they're coming back week after week after week. I wanted them to have some investment in their characters and in the story, and that tends to happen over a bit longer time. So structurally, I've started to aim for sort of stories that are in the 6 to 12 session range, with a session lasting only a couple of hours. So it's that kind of bracket for the length of the tale. So the essential components, the things I actually have to lay out at the beginning of every session, I lay out a page which explains the narrative backstory for the world in which they are they're living, their characters are playing through, whatever that happens to be. So this is almost like the prologue to the story. Then I lay out a sheet explaining how to roll up a character, and where necessary a sheet that says this is how the adventure characters get their stuff. So sometimes it's not just rolling a few stats, sometimes you've got to pick a background, a career, or some equipment. But again, that's all laid out in a step-by-step process. Now this is important because human beings don't always turn up exactly when you think they will. So it was critical that a person could walk in half an hour in to a 2-hour session and you could break the action only long enough to say, here's the backstory, here's how you roll a character. Obviously, if you have any questions, by all means ask them, but hopefully that will keep them busy for 5 minutes while they listen to the game as well, catch up with what's going on, and then their character can jump in with both feet immediately. So those essential components are what I ended up having to bring to every session. Which leads me to how you design the narrative for a game like this. Because you're looking, remember, for something where a huge collective is dealing with a problem. So that narrative structure is essentially the same as you'd expect for any campaign. It's a relatively brief thing, and it's a simplified tale with a series of largely sequential objectives. You can't have too much in the way of branching or anything that might encourage the party to split up. It's got to be, there is our goal, that's what we're focused on. Now, that means broadly, you can say right at the beginning, your objective is over there, and here are the things you have to accomplish to get there, and make each of those steps an essential. Or, alternatively, you can say, actually, this is simply your first mission. There is an underlying plot, but you don't really find out what to do for your second mission or your third mission until you finish the first one. So you learn the details of the plot as you play through, rather than knowing what your objective is, your final objective is right at the beginning, and then taking each one step by step. Now, in my experience now, we've had groups numbering anywhere between 2 and I think 7 is the biggest we've had turn up. The simplicity of the story and the simple character sheets actually makes it really easy to manage this, because the number of conversations you have to have explaining to someone what a saving throw is, or how to make a proficiency check, and helping them find on a complex character sheet where their passive perception might be found. Those kinds of things don't happen. The roles are much simpler than that. There are usually only 2 or 3 they have to learn, and it's literally, you can say, look down at your character sheet, you'll get used to this. This is your statistic. Roll 2d6. If it's equal or under, you've succeeded. It's that kind of roll. And once they've learnt to do that, they can do it every time, because there are a limited number of stats, a limited number of rules. So that kind of process makes it nice and simple. It does mean that the game intrinsically slows down a bit as more people come on board, because you're moving from person to person to ask what their character's doing next. But equally, it makes it really easy to do things like scale combat, because in the same way as your good guys are plucked from a mob, so can your bad guys be. They can, you don't have to have a beautifully constructed final boss fight with exactly the right number of enemies to balance your party's capabilities. You can actually have a boss fight that involves a couple of guards at a door, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and you can crank up the tension and the pressure as they fight their way to their final conclusion. And I would urge you to have some kind of final denouement fight or challenge or puzzle that they have to overcome. It's a good payoff for players in general, I think. So the first 2 that I've run, because we're now coming to the end of the second game in the series, the very first one I did, which is sort of archetypally the perfect mob game, group game like this, was called Revolution. And Revolution was set in I suppose, an alternate history 18th century European society with an evil dictator, which has eventually led to the titular revolution. And as a consequence, the the mob is a group of local tradesmen, artisans, peasants, professionals, whatever. There were a number of story backgrounds for them, who are assembling for the final assault on the palace in the middle of the city, taking on the guards and their weapons, and having lots of opportunity for picking their own route through the map, for identifying where they were going to find their allies or enemies. At one point, the group turned a large cannon on the people who'd actually put it there to defend the city. They turned it around and used it to open fire on the gatehouse into the inner city, for example. In other places, some PCs wanted to try and argue their way through situations rather than just fight and kill everything, which is always rather nice when you're when you're a GM to have people who want to do something other than just murder hobo their way through the game, and that was lovely. And it was in most ways a fairly successful story. For the second one, we went for, well, I went for a cyberpunk style story set in London in 2099. Now, this one was arguably more on rails in the sense that once they signed on, they were given a mission and then another mission and then another mission, though obviously they had plenty of freedom to explore each mission map and decide how they wanted to proceed. But with this one, they didn't really have the final objective in mind. That would be revealed as they completed each mission. And I wanted to try it this way to see if that was more or less successful. And I think they both have strengths, actually. Based on running both of them, I think there was a little bit more freedom in the first style for the characters, but with a group of people, some of whom have played a lot of RPGs, some of whom are really very much newcomers, the sense of being able to follow a narrative that is laid out in front of you can actually be easier for inexperienced players. They come to a point sometimes where they're not entirely sure what they're allowed to do, if you see what I mean. They're used to games which have much more restrictive approaches. So this was important for me to try both styles and see which worked, and the answer is both of them actually worked. Arguably, they work differently for different types of player, but I'm probably going to try to aim for something a little bit more in between for the future, giving them a clearer final objective, but at the same time providing a bit more structure to the way to get there, if that makes sense. I hope it does. And the next one that we're going to run, which will be in 2 or 3 weeks' time, we'll start the next one. The next one will be a high fantasy story, and I've written an intro for it, and it's to get them started, and it's got all of the things you'd expect from a high fantasy background. I'm going to try a slightly different character creation and system set for the next one, because it's a more complicated thing to take into account things like the use of magic, and it's harder to have a system that makes efficient use of things that people would expect to find, like magical defences, heavily armoured characters that rely on shields or stealth or things like that. There isn't enough flexibility in the basic rules I've been using. So I've come up with a really simple, really easy to understand system which does include all of those things. And this high fantasy one is, well, the intent behind it is that it is set in a world which should be quite fun for anyone who's ever played high fantasy RPGs before or is familiar with that setting in literature and TV and films. Because what I've done is taken a story which has I've built a story which has all of the standard tropes in it, literally every single one of them lined up. It could not be more familiar. And then each of those tropes I've just twisted or turned on its head in order to make it a bit more interesting and amusing for the characters. So they should see everything they would expect to see in a high fantasy game, and yet everything will be new to them and unusual and require a bit more thought and consideration rather than just I see the orc so I stick the sharp end of my sword in it kind of thing. So hopefully that will be fun. So the reason I actually wanted to tell you all of this, because obviously this isn't a game that I'm planning to run on stream anytime soon unless the other boys from the Baltic Star demand it. The reason is that the Health Champions program at our local surgery is not just a local surgery program. It is a national initiative by the NHS, or at least parts of the NHS, and it's intended to encourage people to make use of their surgeries facilities and connections without necessarily needing to always call a GP, for example. The idea is... IMT, thank you for joining. I know you're going to be horribly disappointed. We're not actually playing a game tonight. I'm just talking randomly about this thing that I invented. So I must apologise. I really will completely understand if you say, well, this does not sound like it's going to be any fun at all. It's kind of a seminar, one might say. Not only that, it's coming right to the end. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had a lovely time this evening. What were you guys playing? The point I was saying is, it doesn't have to be this structure. You don't have to do it the way I chose to do it. It's absolutely not necessary that you do anything like that. But if you are interested in RPGs and you are capable of and up for running one, I'm here to tell you, if you're based in the UK, there is a program that is being supported by your local NHS trusts and surgeries, where they will encourage you to be a volunteer to run tabletop RPGs in the community for the benefit of your local community. And I think that's a lovely thing. And I've been doing it for a while now, months and months now, and I am thoroughly enjoying it. I'm getting a great deal out of it. It's also, it's a lovely feeling to think that you're giving something back to the community and everything like that. But it's also creating and running tabletop RPGs, which isn't really a chore, if you know what I mean. You get to meet some very nice people, some of whom have never played an RPG before, some of whom are old hands. And the idea is that you're providing a community service for the area. So if you're based in the UK, your local NHS trust or surgery may well have their own Health Champions program, which is what they call them, and they may be interested in people running a community tabletop RPG game or any other kind of community project that appeals to you. If you don't feel confident running a game, seriously, it's worth asking, because if they're running these kinds of things, there is some astonishing stuff being done in this local community, and this local community isn't that unusual. So if you are interested in that kind of thing, I would urge you to contact your local NHS bodies. And I'm aware that not everybody on the internet is British. In fact, not even most of the people on the internet are British. And I know that the same kind of arrangements may not be present in other places and may not even be of interest in some NHS trust areas. I only really have experience of my own. But if there is an interest from anybody to get any of the notes or materials I prepared for the DIDO games I ran, so you can have a go at setting up a community game where literally people can jump in and out of a campaign, just turn up for one session or 3 sessions, and however many sessions they turn up, there's a story for them to follow, a character for them to play, a mission for them to execute. And yet, for those who come back week after week, there's a coherent narrative that runs for a month or two. If that kind of thing sounds interesting and you'd like to know how I built it, as you can imagine, I've got notes, scenarios, maps, plans, and diagrams, and instructions for how the rule sets work that I built so that people could have a really simple character creation process. And please do let me know, because if there's anything I can do that would help you set up a community game like that, I'd be more than happy to do that. I think it would be almost literally the very least I could do. And I can promise you it's been extremely rewarding for me to do this kind of thing, and I suspect it would be for almost anyone. And I'd happily do it on stream as well, but obviously it's complicated to do that on stream if you don't already know who's coming and who to put into a drop-in, drop-out game. But at some point I may kidnap 1 or 2 of our regulars or one of the boys from the Baltic Star and go through at least one session of a game like that on stream, so you can see how the rule systems work live. But seriously, if you're interested, do get in touch on Discord to our channel there, and I will happily send you far too much material on how I set about building those games and how I made them as accessible, as straightforward, and most importantly, as drop in and drop out as I possibly could. So apologies for this change to our normal programming. It was rather forced upon me by the absence of both of my normal compatriots, but it did give me an opportunity to talk about something that I feel quite optimistic and enthusiastic about. So if you were expecting actual gameplay tonight, I'm very sorry. But thank you very much, anyone who watches it live. Thank you to IMT in particular. It was incredibly kind of you to turn up and join us, or join me this evening. And I'm very sorry it wasn't quite what you were hoping for. But I will bid you a good night now. And please do get in touch over Discord if you want any advice or help from anybody who has a raid train. I have no idea what's on, and actually I've never done a raid before. How do I do that? So this is going to be interesting. Oh, I'm not sure I can, because I've only got the OBS instance up. Much as I would love to. Will that work in OBS? Let's try it. Okay, so let's see if there is anyone else on who might be of interest. What have we got? Lollygaggers are on. How about lollygaggers? That sound all right to everyone? Let's give it a shot from OBS and see if it works. Which is right /raid and then the name of the stream, I assume, the lollygaggers. Okay, we will try it. Let's give it a shot. Okay. It said the raid has been created. Okay. Excellent. Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll see you in the lollygaggers. It doesn't seem to have taken us anywhere yet. Is there something else I have to do? Oh no, it looks like there's just a counting down thing. It's probably giving me the opportunity. Do I have to hit the leave button? Not leave, no. Okay. Got it. Raid now. There we go.